Welcome back. Our guest in this segment is Dr. Trevor Hancock. It's December 1st, 2015. Trevor, the climate change conference is taking place in Paris right now. You've just introduced me to a new term called global ecological change, which I guess is the even bigger picture.
Yes.
So tell us about it.
Well, I've just been leading for the last 3 years a major report for the Canadian Public Health Association on the health impacts of global ecological change. And what we include in that is not just climate change, which is very big, but also pollution and something called ecotoxicity, the fact we all carry a body burden of persistent organic pollutants, resource depletion, and loss of biodiversity and loss of species, so a sixth great extinction. All of those together, and they tend to interact in negative ways, are called global ecological change.
And I guess each of us contributes, in this country, each of us contributes a lot.
That's right.
To this kind of thing.
Yes, I mean our so-called ecological footprint is much greater than that of low-income countries, and so one of the issues is that we can't turn to those countries, or the same with climate change and carbon emissions. We can't turn to those countries and say you need to use less carbon if we don't first of all do that ourselves. So we need to change, in a sense, everything. Naomi Klein's new book is about climate change, and it says this changes everything. That's the title of the book.
Now, I have a feeling that we can reduce our footprint by half and probably have better lives. And of course we have to go even lower, but I think we can reduce by half and have better lives than we have now in many, many ways.
Well, that's one of the areas of hope in all of this, because of course it gets to be a bit gloomy when all you talk about is all the crises and the problems we're facing. So in the report we have a whole chapter called Imagining a Better Future, and then another whole chapter called Finding Hope, because there actually is all sorts of reasons for some hope. I would describe myself as a sort of pessimistic optimist. In the long run, I'm optimistic that we will manage something. In the short run, we're not doing a very good job of it. And what's really distressing is that none of the stuff we're talking about now was unknown, in essence, 40 years ago. So we've lost 40 years of inaction. But there's a great deal we can do. And one of the really positive things about all of this is anything we do that makes the community or the society more ecologically sustainable almost always has positive health impacts, which is my bottom line.
So what are some things that we can do?
Well, a first place to begin is with just energy use. If you look at fossil fuel energy use, it produces a great deal of air pollution. And so there are literally thousands of people every year in southern Ontario who die prematurely because of air pollution, chiefly coming up from the Ohio Valley, from the coal-fired power stations there. So, plus of course all the vehicle emissions and so on. Ontario, of course, is just phasing out coal-based power. When you do that, not only do you reduce a lot of carbon emissions, but you improve air quality and you improve health. If you look at what's happening right now in Beijing, where they have levels of air pollution that are something like 25 times the acceptable limit, anything they do to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and all of the air pollutants that come with it, it's not the carbon dioxide that's the problem so much for us, that's a problem for the planet. What's a problem for us is the particulate matter and the acid emissions that cause bronchitis and emphysema and all of those problems.
So we have to reduce.
I'm sorry?
We have to reduce.
Well, we do, but in reducing we have benefits too, so that we get cleaner air. If we build cities that are much more walkable, then not only do you reduce emissions because you have far fewer people driving cars, but people are actually more active. There's some very good research that a guy called Larry Frank at UBC, a professor there, has done, looking at the relationship between urban sprawl and physical activity and obesity. And not surprisingly, he finds that the more there is urban sprawl, the less physical activity there is, and the greater the amount of obesity there is.
Now, you travel the world, so you get a
Yes.
chance to see great things that are happening. And when you talk about building better cities, can you give us some examples?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Copenhagen because in the 90s in particular, because it's the regional office for the World Health Organization for Europe is there, and I worked there. And that's a very good example of a city that not dissimilar in climate from right here in Victoria, which has huge bicycle infrastructure, and you have to build separate infrastructure. So if you go to Copenhagen, you have the road, then you have a little curb, then you have the bike lane, then you have a curb, and you have the pedestrian sidewalk. So they're physically separated. They even have separate traffic lights for cyclists at intersections, so that you get a red light for the cars and a green light for the bicycles, so they can move through, that sort of thing. And it's a culture as well of doing that, of biking everywhere. And it's a far more dense urban setting than ours is, but not, interestingly enough, a lot of high-rise. So it's dense on the ground, but you don't see a lot of high-rises in Denmark.
How big a city is Copenhagen?
It's about 2 million, I think, so about the size of Toronto.
You wanted to talk also about vital, do you want to say anything else about the issue of, well, let me ask you this question. With global ecological change, if we don't make the changes, and the changes are going to be huge, because basically we're going to have to get rid of the car, I think.
Well, we don't necessarily have to get rid of the car. We have to get rid of fossil fuels from the point of view of climate change. And actually there was a report from a group of Canadian scholars earlier this year that showed that it was entirely feasible to go to 100% renewables as an energy source for Canada by 2100. In fact, I think it was something like 80% by 2050. So we can get off fossil fuels. We know how to do it. What's lacking is, or has been lacking, is the political will. I think we're beginning to see that change with the election of the new government.
I hope you're right. So if we don't, then what is the result?
Well, in the longer term, essentially we're hooped, because the combination of climate change and all that does to the earth, and loss of species and biodiversity, loss of renewable resources and of non-renewable resources for that matter. So we're damaging the oceans, for example, which is the basis of
plus the soil
change, and the soil. All of that put together, there's a very clear history that civilizations in the past have collapsed when their ecosystems have disintegrated, or not disintegrated, but declined to the point they can't support that society. But this is now happening at a global scale. In fact, geologists are telling us we're entering a new era, a new geological epoch, which they're calling the Anthropocene. So our impact on the Earth is so massive that we're going to show up in the geologic record millions of years into the future. You'll be able to see a line in the strata, in the geology, and say, well, that was the 21st century.
So we have a lot to do very quickly to make sure total disaster doesn't happen.
Yes.
You wanted to talk a little bit about the Vital Signs report, which came out, I think, a few months ago.
Yes, it came out actually
the
in
Victoria
October.
Foundation put it out.
Well, that's a very interesting exercise. The Victoria Community Foundation now for 10 years has been producing a report called Vital Signs, which tries to measure the well-being of communities. And I wrote a feature essay for them this year called Measuring What Matters. And what's interesting about this is if you look federally, or if you look even provincially, the way we seem to measure progress and our success is by how big the GDP is, how big the economy has grown. Municipalities don't do that. I don't know any municipality that measures its progress using GDP. They measure quality of life, a whole range of different issues that they look at. And that's also what the Vital Signs report does. And so what I was writing about was that we have to, and it actually ties in very much with the global ecological change agenda, we have to get away from thinking that our purpose in life is to grow the economy, and understand that our purpose in life, if you like, is to grow people. How do we maximize human development and human well-being within the constraints of the one small planet we live on? And that will totally change the way that we measure progress. Right now, we're often measuring what, in a sense, really doesn't matter, which is GDP, because what really matters is human well-being and ecological sustainability. And if you focus on those, then the policies you will select to maximize those is very different from the policies you will select to maximize GDP.
I completely agree that that is so much more important. If you were the Prime Minister and the Premier today, what directions would you move in to build a better human society?
Well, I think part of what I argued in the report is that if you measure the wrong things, then you manage the wrong things. There's this management phrase that says you can only manage what you measure. So if we're not measuring the right things, then we're not managing the right things. So it is quite central to this. The federal government, the provinces, they actually need to learn from municipalities about measuring what matters. And that would mean that, yes, you might want to grow the economy, but you don't grow the economy at the expense of the environment. You don't grow the economy at the expense of human well-being or social development.
And I guess you at least put the homeless into homes.
Well, which is not only a more humane thing to do, but actually is a lot cheaper than leaving them on the streets and picking up the pieces.
Trevor, we're out of time. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.